In another press conference that was held outside with at least one pastor and members of a black community, Minnesota Governor Mark Dayton made the attempt to assure the public that he would do everything in his power to see justice done in light of the police shooting of Philando Castile. During the time that he was speaking, someone in the crowd kept saying in a loud voice, "Black Lives Matter." It should be understood that Castile was killed on July 6, 2016, and this press conference occurred on the day after. Emotions were still running high and very raw. It didn't matter what Governor Dayton said. People were still in pain, and Black Lives Matter seemed to take on a different expression than it normally does. As the governor, Dayton may have been trying to do all that he was supposed to do as soon as possible, but his management of duties were not going to cause the community to heal any sooner. Though a press conference outside with a freshly grieving community hardly depicts the healing that can come from a restorative justice process, the attitude and effort that Governor Dayton demonstrated is what is needed should there be some form of reconciliation to begin. From the perspective of restorative justice, this alternative may be controversial in its implications. What the process called for example, in South Africa, when Nelson Mandela became president, was the police and government officials from the old administration coming forth and admitting the harm that was done in the black community, as well as not only the victims and survivors being given space to tell their stories of oppression, but also what I call a big ask, beginning a long healing process that involves forgiving the perpetrator. Black Lives Matter has been effective in awareness raising of the violence that has been inflicted on black communities. What if part of this initiative involved an open invitation to perpetrators to admit the harm that they have committed? I am aware of a few churches who have started dialogues with their local police departments shortly after some of the killings that have occurred over the last 2 years. However, there are a number of issues that I consider when I imagine our country in local settings attempting this reconciliation process. The first challenge involves who the mediators would be in a reconciliation process between government officials and the black community. After Dylann Roof killed the 9 church members at Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church, there was government coercion to get survivors and loved ones of the victims to say publicly that they forgave Roof. This was not part of a reconciliation process. If power dynamics can be used to prompt unrealistic acts or statements of forgiveness, there is no true healing for the victims or survivors. If, however, both perpetrators and victims can come together, the perpetrators admitting their wrongdoing and the victims telling their story, healing can come for both. It is possible that the level of skepticism that these seemingly endemic atrocities have produced may cause a type of leverage in power dynamics that a restorative justice process needs. Not only should police departments have restorative justice agents working with them, I believe that churches and organizations like Black Lives Matter should employ restorative justice agents as well. Like the instance with Minnesota Governor Mark Dayton, between the pain that the black community is experiencing and our punitive Western thinking, somebody has to pay. Restorative justice involves some type of paradigm shift. What if George Zimmerman paid for his crime? In many ways, he is paying for his crime on a social level. If you've kept up with the news about him, he seems to be in some type of social exile. But would this stop the senseless killings or even cause healing in the black community? I don't believe so. Even though Darren Wilson was not indicted, he has not been able to get law enforcement employment since he killed Michael Brown. That was 2 years ago. But the Alton Sterling shooting, as well as the Philando Castile shooting, seems to indicate that the awareness-raising initiatives of Black Lives Matter has not slowed down the violence that the black community is experiencing, nor are we getting the much-needed healing for this country. But continuing my what-if scenarios, let's say that people like George Zimmerman and Darren Wilson met with Black Lives Matter, faith communities, and the loved ones of those who were taken away at their hands and began a restorative justice process. And what if this became a practice as opposed to the business as usual of seeking justice by our current criminal justice system, retributive justice? Of course, unlike Governor Dayton's press conference, this process would have to be within a private meeting to avoid any theatrical performances or outlandish attempts to fame and attention, something that I would imagine George Zimmerman resorting to. Even if the process only got as far as loved ones being able to tell their stories to their perpetrators, there is healing and closure that can come from this part of the process. Writing Zimmerman and Wilson off as monsters or devils frees them of the responsibility and accountability that human beings are called to in their communal nature. As I point out that we aren't getting the different results in our retributive justice approach to wrongdoing toward the black community, I am suggesting that we have to do something different. And the alternative that I am presenting is a restorative justice model. Let the victims face the perpetrators, not to pass judgment on them, but rather to meet them as human beings and tell them how they have affected their lives, and give the perpetrators the opportunity to admit the harm that they have caused. Reconciliation is a long process, but it has lasting results, as the Truth and Reconciliation Commission has proven in South Africa.